My name is Skip Bennett, and I own Island Creek Oysters, which is an oyster farm in Duxbury, Massachusetts, and a wholesale company that distributes those oysters all over the United States. We also own a restaurant in the city of Boston called the Island Creek Oyster Bar. Oysters and all farm-raised shellfish are unique in that the food that they eat is oftentimes a nuisance to the environment. So whereas most proteins that we grow, we add a lot, there's a lot of inputs, a lot of fossil fuels, water, chemicals. With the oysters, they're eating live plankton, phytoplankton, which exists in the wild, but when people live in and around the watershed, we create a lot of excess nitrogen, which runs off, and nitrogen is really the limiting factor to algal blooms. So we get, with people living around the water, we get excessive algal blooms. Oysters and clams and mussels are very efficient at removing not only the excess nitrogen, but all of the phytoplankton as well. So it's unique in that we aren't adding anything or taking away from kind of the food supply by growing grains and feeding them to animals. So it's a very sustainable way to grow protein. Oyster farming in its present day form is very different than oyster farming historically, which goes back thousands of years. The Romans used to farm oysters, but it was pretty simple. They went out and gathered seed or wild spat oysters and then brought them into a controlled area, embayments and areas where they preferred the taste of the oysters, so they would grow those oysters out. And it's evolved over the years to now include hatchery seed. So all of our oysters are spawned or reared in a hatchery and then brought out into the bay and grown out in the bay. Oyster farming is both a science and an art. There's definitely a lot of physical science that goes behind, especially in the hatchery end of it. Growing plankton and growing out the larvae is very scientific. But once they come out of the hatchery and they're in the grow out stage, it's a bit more of an art in the sense that we're out there every day and we watch, especially when the seed's growing during the summer. We look at the seed all the time and make sure that the density is okay, that they're getting enough food, that each year is different in terms of the environmental conditions, and they oftentimes might need something a little different than they needed the year before. So a little more attention, or a little more farming. Last year we built, so in 2011, we built a very small kind of an experimental hatchery, real kind of shoestring hatchery, and this year we've built a pretty legitimate hatchery where we have a facility where we can produce most of our own oyster seed here. I think in a way oyster farming chose me because when I was growing up I had lobster traps in the bay, and when I was in high school and college I dug mussels and razor clams, and really I think the attraction for me was working on the water, was probably the first reason why I got out there. But the independence of it, the physical work, I really loved being outdoors and physically working hard. But I also knew that wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So after college, I took 1 year to make a little bit of money and get my resume together. And I heard about some guys out on the Cape that were growing clams. So I started growing clams in 1990. And in 95, all of my clams died. I really hated the idea of getting a job, so I tried some oysters. Today, the Island Creek Oysters includes, I think, 6 growers. We've had a couple of tough years. We went through some disease issues in the last few years, but we were producing around 6 million oysters a year. We'll probably produce at least that many this year. And we are growing. Every year we try to find better ways to farm and better ways to maximize our yield, our return. We still jokingly say we kill a lot of oysters, so hopefully this year we'll be able to not only grow more oysters but get a higher return. that for me, oyster farming has changed over the years. Originally I did everything, and then it was time to, when I finally had oysters to sell, I did everything in the wholesale company too. So I was growing the seed and harvesting the market size oysters and culling the oysters, washing the oysters. But I was also driving the truck and doing the books and all of the FDA logs. So it was a little bit of everything. What I like now is that I'm able to pick and choose the things that I want to do and the things that really need my attention. So this year it's been largely the hatchery, and now that the seed's out in the water, I'm really active in taking care of the seed and making sure that everything's going the way that it should. A large part of what makes Island Creek a great oyster is the environment it's grown in. The salinity of the water, the temperature of the water, the type of plankton that grows in the bay here. Even the rise and fall of the tide can have an effect on the flavor profile. Certainly the minerals in the water would dictate the flavor. But then, just like terroir, there's the grower side, where we strive to grow very round, deep cup oysters that are harvested at the right size, which is really the kind of the art of farming. Well, it's a great culture. It's a great way of life, and I think that a lot of people will come work here when they're kids and later realize that this is a beautiful way of life. It's really being in touch with the environment and in nature and growing something that all of the growers are very, very proud of.